In addition to stories told by the family of Holocaust survivors, this afternoon we're going to be hearing 2 stories of more recent genocides in Rwanda and Bosnia. This is new to our showcase and is another reminder of why, even though it is hard to tell and to hear stories like this, it's crucially important that we bear witness to them. You probably have all heard the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. quote when he said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." By bringing light to these stories and showering love upon these survivors, we can take steps together to bring more light into the world. All right, so opening our show tonight is Linda Grosser. Linda is coming to us from her home in Newton Highlands, Massachusetts. Linda's been telling stories since 2018 and recently produced 2 outdoor storytelling events in her hometown called Storied Nights, which is a great name, Linda. In what she calls her prior life, she worked at Boston University and IBM. Prior to all of our shows, you guys, I always ask our storytellers a question that will help us get to know a little bit about them before they tell their stories. And this time, I think, you know, with all of us doing very little visiting and very little traveling, I was wondering, what's the best place you've ever been? Maybe we can get some ideas about where we can go when all of this is behind us. Linda said her favorite place is any ocean. And then she shared this beautiful story with me. She went on to say, rain or shine, beach combing, boogie boarding, playing in the waves, walking the beach, listening to the waves, it's my happy place. I especially love going to Hull, Massachusetts, which reminds me of Long Beach, New York, where my grandparents lived when I was young. I would go for summers, collecting shells, eating ice cream, playing under the boardwalk. It's got the same wide Long Beach in a small working class town. Not a lot of fanfare, just the ocean and the beach. That sounds like a very idyllic, happy place. Please welcome Linda Grosser.
My sister and I are in Vienna, and we're waiting on the platform for the number 60 tram. And I'm looking around, just sort of soaking up the old world atmosphere. I'm standing there, and a pigeon craps on me. And there's this woman next to me, and she says and smiles, you know, that means good luck. And I'm thinking, well, that's good, because on the very first day, Andy and I have already had some tension between us, something that had to do with the place that we were staying at. I had to convince her to come on this trip. We were not close growing up, and as adults, we had never spent not even one night, just us, together on a trip. And now we have 21 days. This is a roots trip. Our father, Rudolf Grosser, later Rudy, grew up in Vienna. Vienna, a city of culture and grandeur, an elegant coffee house on every corner. And his was a life of privilege. Private school, skiing in the Alps, summers at the Black Sea. And I wanted to come to this place where he had once thrived and then was forced to flee. And lucky, the whole family got out. So we had decided early on that we did want to go to where he had lived. So with the address in hand, we're on the tram. We get out in the old town, in the historic town. And from there, it's a quick walk across the Danube Canal to Leopoldstadt, the Jewish section since the 1600s. We arrive, number 114, Hollandstrasse. And I can't believe it. I am looking up at this ornate Baroque style apartment building. This is where my father had lived. This was the place that he would return from work every day, taking that same 10-minute walk that we just took from the old town. So we're looking at these massive wooden doors that are locked, trying to figure out what do we do now. And just then, the door opens and a woman comes out, and we have like a second to decide, and we just slip in like we belong. So inside, we hear voices, and we walk to the back, and in this courtyard is a sukkah. So a sukkah is like a makeshift hut that Jews build to celebrate the harvest festival. We meet the family that's there and start talking to them. We tell them our whole story. We tell them that our dad lived in this building 80 years ago. They invite us into their sukkah. They invite us to sit down at their table. They give us cake. They give us fruit salad. And we meet all of their adorable children, Ben and Rachel and Tzvi, and everybody is talking. And I am thinking, my kitchen table when I was a kid was nothing like this. My father would be in his own world. He would be listening to classical music on this little black transistor radio. And I can't remember him ever talking to us about anything, telling us a story, asking us. Any little tidbits we knew about his life was from our mother. And that culture of silence was such in our family that my own sister and I did not talk. And it was his silence, in part, really, that brought me to Vienna, to learn something about him, to learn where I came from. So Andy and I had agreed that we both wanted to have an experience of the music in Vienna. It was such a big part of his life. We go to the Musikverein, this famous concert hall. People are elegantly dressed, unlike us. And then we look in the program and we see that the guest conductor tonight is none other than Andris Nelsons from the Boston Symphony, where I live. After the concert, we reminisce about Dad's little radio and how our grandmother could, within the first 10 seconds, recognize any piece of classical music. So we leave and we cut through this fancy hotel lobby, and there's a gala music event going on, and we go out the front door, and just then, getting out of this limousine is another Boston conductor, Keith Lockhart from the Boston Pops. And my sister says, I have never done anything like this. And she charges ahead, puts out her hand and says, Mr. Lockhart, my name is Andy Goodman. This is my sister, Linda Grosser. We're from Boston and we are your biggest fans. And we just came from the Musikverein and we saw Andris Nelson. And he says, oh, that's weird. I didn't know he was in town too. And we had a chuckle. So we saw 2 more concerts and 1 opera on that trip. Every day was a new adventure. Turned out we both really loved hiking in the Vienna woods. And we'd go to some mountain lodge. One time we had this delicious pumpkin soup. And then Andy threw up the pumpkin soup. But it was amazing. We were so simpatico about food. When, what, and where we would eat our meals. And we wanted 3 meals. So we'd have breakfast at the apartment, and then we'd go out and we'd have some midday meal like schnitzel. And then in the evening, without fail, our meal was dessert. And normally it was going in search of these crepes that were filled with jam that our grandmother used to make, and they were called palachinkin. Often we would have to, for the menu items, we would put the German into Google Translate. And one time we did that, and it came out minced peckers. We didn't order that. Well, I did not understand German really at all. And before the trip, I tried to learn a little with this app, Duolingo, and my sister did the same. When we get to Vienna, after a little while there, Andrea starts speaking in full sentences and conversations in German. And I'm looking at her like, who is this person? And she thinks it came back to her because until she was 3, she and my parents lived with my Austrian grandparents in New York City, and they only spoke German. After I came along and we moved to New Jersey, what I remember is that when we would visit his Mutti, his mother, my father would speak German then, or to his only 2 friends, Hans and Jimmy, also from Vienna. Hearing Andy, my sister, speak German like that, it was just bittersweet. You know, I had this visceral feeling of comfort and familiarity. But then I would get sad, remembering and thinking about how my dad really never reclaimed his voice when he got to New York. In 1938, November 9th and 10th, it was Kristallnacht. Those were 2 days of Nazi violence and destruction across all of Austria and all of Germany. And they destroyed Jewish homes, Jewish businesses, synagogues. My father was arrested, he was beat up. He almost lost his life because he didn't get the insulin that he needed. And he became desperate. I mean, it was still possible. Nazis would let you emigrate at that point, but it was really tough to find a country and get a visa because you needed to have a financial sponsor. So we got this idea. We went to the post office. We found these phone books, all these cities from the US, and he looked up people whose name was Grosser. And he wrote them letters and asked if they would pretend to be a cousin and to sponsor him. And then he waited. And one day he gets a letter from a dentist, a Dr. David Grosser from Boston, who agreed. My dad fled on April 9th, 1939. And he found out later that they had come for him the following week. He landed in New York City at the age of 26. It should have been the prime of his life. Being in Austria now, I understood his legacy in a new way. Today, the Austrians still have not really acknowledged and faced up to what happened during that time period. And I saw that my father was brave. He found a way out and he survived. And the other thing I appreciated was his delightful European charm and culture that he did bring with him. And I remember when I was like 10, I would put both my feet on his feet and he would teach me how to waltz. So before this whole trip, I got some information from this Jewish Viennese organization. And they told me that my great grandmother, Pauline, was buried in Vienna in 1942. And I am incredulous because apparently or supposedly everybody had gotten out in 1939. But more than that, I've had hanging in my house all these years a needlepoint with a stitched signature, Pauline Lustig. And all this time, it was just this thing hanging on my wall. No one ever talked about her. And now it turns out she is still in Vienna. section 10, row 3, plot 31. Andy and I go to the Vienna Central Cemetery. We find the section and the row, and when we get to plot 31, there is nothing there. It is just grass. And I am so disappointed. The office had assured us that Pauline was there. That was her spot. And sometimes there were no headstones because there was no money. So I'm just standing around on the grass. And then I hear my sister, Linda, come and help me. And I turn around and I see Andrea. She's digging in the dirt behind the headstone next to Pauline's spot. And now we are both yanking on this stupid slab of cement that Andy saw stuck in the ground. It comes free. We brush off the dirt. On this headstone, engraved, Pauline Lustig, 1865-1942. I don't know if I want to laugh or cry. Andy and I, we have literally unearthed our own great-grandmother's marker. It feels like we have resurrected Pauline herself. We laugh, we hug, we take selfies. When I get back to Boston, people would ask me, what was the best part of your trip? And I would remember listening to that music that my dad loved, standing in the house that he lived in and finding Pauline. And then without a moment's hesitation, I would say the best part of the trip was laughing and giggling with my sister. I traveled 4,000 miles to learn about my father and where I came from. And I did that. But really what I found my sister. I love you, Andy. Thank you.
That was fantastic, Linda. What a beautiful way to open our show. And what an amazing story with so many incredible, gorgeous connections. Just your whole story from beginning to end was just connection after connection, and just really beautiful and beautifully told. So thank you so much for sharing that.